Most people imagine that understanding the quantum field looks like a breakthrough, a moment where everything becomes clear, where life suddenly opens, where something clicks and never unclicks again. They expect a turning point that feels dramatic, unmistakable, obvious. But that isn't how it happens. In reality, understanding begins far more quietly and almost always in the middle of life, not at the edges. It shows up when nothing is particularly resolved yet. When patterns are still repeating, when questions are unanswered, when things feel stalled, delayed, or oddly unresolved, and that's precisely why most people miss it. Understanding the field does not announce itself. It doesn't arrive as certainty or confidence. It arrives as a subtle destabilization, a shift that removes familiar explanations without immediately replacing them. One day you notice that the old ways you've been interpreting your life don't land the same way anymore. The stories you used to tell yourself feel thin. The strategies that once made sense feel heavy. You're not lost, but you're no longer convinced by the narratives that used to keep you comfortable. This is the moment most people turn away. They assume something has gone wrong. They look for clarity elsewhere. They look for reassurance, for technique, for something that restores the feeling of control. And in doing so, they step back from the threshold without ever realizing they were standing in front of it. Only a small percentage of people stay, not because they are braver or more evolved, but because they're willing to sit inside the discomfort of not knowing what they thought they knew. They don't rush to fix the feeling. They don't immediately translate it into meaning. They let the internal ground shift without trying to stabilize it too quickly. And that willingness changes everything. Because the first thing understanding takes from you is the belief that something outside you needs to change first. Most people spend their lives trying to arrange the external world into cooperation, better timing, better conditions, better alignment, better circumstances. Understanding the field quietly dismantles that orientation. It introduces a different recognition, one that feels unsettling at first. Reality has always been responding. The question is not whether it works, but what it has been responding to. And this is where the divide begins, because understanding the field doesn't make you feel powerful. It makes you accountable. It removes the comfort of thinking you were overlooked, unlucky, or blocked. It reveals that life has been answering faithfully the entire time, just not to the part of you that thought it was speaking. This is why only a small fraction ever truly understand it. Most people want confirmation, they want proof, they want reassurance that they're on the right path. Understanding offers none of that at the beginning. It offers feedback, quiet, precise, often inconvenient feedback. It shows you that effort was never the issue, belief was never the issue, desire was never the issue. The issue was coherence. And coherence is not something you declare, it's something you live. When this starts to land, it doesn't feel like insight. It feels like exposure. You begin to notice how much of your life has been driven by automatic responses, how often you brace before anything actually happens, how frequently your decisions are shaped by anticipation of loss rather than alignment with truth. You see how much of your energy has been spent managing outcomes instead of inhabiting your own state. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Now, this is the point where many people feel a quiet resistance rising, a desire to move past this realization quickly and to turn it into a method, to make it productive, to make it useful. But understanding doesn't move on command. It deepens when you stop trying to use it. This is where the 1% separate themselves without intending to. They stop asking what they should do next and start noticing how they are actually living now. They pay attention to their internal posture instead of their external goals. They become curious about what they embody when nothing is happening, how they sit inside waiting, how they respond to friction. how they speak to themselves when outcomes are uncertain. These moments don't look important, but they are where the signal is formed. The reason most people never understand the field is simple and uncomfortable. Understanding asks you to relinquish the fantasy that you are negotiating with reality from the outside. It invites you to recognize that you are already inside the conversation, and you always have been. Your reactions, your patterns, your emotional defaults have been speaking long before your conscious intentions ever entered the room. This realization doesn't feel empowering at first. It feels humbling. It removes the illusion that something needs to arrive before you can change. It shows you that the change has always been internal and that reality has been responding accordingly. This is the beginning, not of manifestation, not of mastery, but of honesty. And honesty is rare. It's much easier to stay focused on outcomes than to examine the state you're living from. It's much easier to learn new language than to let old identities loosen. Understanding the field doesn't elevate you. It strips you of what no longer fits. That's why so few stay with it long enough to understand it at all. If you're still listening at this point, it's likely because something here feels familiar, not exciting, not inspirational, but accurate. And that recognition matters, because understanding doesn't begin with belief. It begins with a quiet willingness to stop pretending that the problem was ever outside you. Once understanding begins, a subtle but unavoidable realization follows. Reality has always been responsive. The field has never been dormant, distant, or selective. It has been active, continuously responding in real time to what you embody. Most people assume they are communicating with reality through intention, through desire, through thought. They believe what matters most is what they want, what they hope for, what they repeat to themselves internally. But the field does not register want, it registers state. State is quieter than thought. It lives beneath language. It shows up as your emotional baseline, your posture toward uncertainty, the way your system holds itself when nothing is happening yet. State is how you move through waiting. It is how you respond before you have time to think. It is the tone of your attention when you're not performing clarity for yourself or anyone else. This is the level where the field listens. You don't need special sensitivity to understand this. You already experience it every day in human interaction. You can walk into a room and feel tension without anyone speaking. You can sense ease in someone who hasn't said a word. Presence communicates faster than explanation. Emotion communicates faster than logic. The body communicates faster than intention. The field operates at that same level of immediacy. It doesn't pause to interpret your thoughts. It responds to the coherence or fragmentation already present in your system. This is why so many well-meaning practices fall flat. People focus intensely on what they are trying to create while ignoring how they are inhabiting the moment they're in. They visualize futures while their nervous system remains contracted. They speak words of trust while their decisions are shaped by protection. They hold images of abundance while their attention is trained on potential loss. None of this is wrong. It's simply informative. The field receives the information exactly as it's being transmitted. Understanding deepens when you recognize that the field isn't responding to your desire, but to your orientation. Orientation is revealed in small, ordinary moments. How you wait for a response, how you interpret silence, how you fill space when nothing is confirmed yet. These moments don't feel significant, but they are consistent, and consistency is what the field organizes around. For most people, this realization creates discomfort. It removes the safety of believing that effort alone should be enough. It introduces a different kind of responsibility, one that can't be outsourced or bypassed. You begin to see that you can't speak your way into alignment. You have to live it. And living it doesn't mean perfection. It means honesty about what is actually active beneath the surface. When this lands, it often changes how you see your past. you start to recognize that many of the outcomes you labeled as setbacks or delays were precise reflections of your internal state at the time. Not punishments, not lessons imposed from outside, responses. You may notice how periods of urgency produced scattered results, how moments of resignation produced stagnation, how times of quiet confidence produced unexpected openings. This isn't hindsight bias, it's pattern recognition. The reason only a small percentage truly understand the field is because this recognition is uncomfortable to hold without distortion. It removes excuses without replacing them with blame. It doesn't allow you to see yourself as powerless, but it also doesn't allow you to see yourself as in control. It places you inside a living system where influence arises from coherence rather than force. As this awareness grows, attention naturally shifts. You stop asking what you should be thinking and start noticing how you are actually showing up. You become aware of subtle internal signals you once ignored. The tightening in the chest when you anticipate an outcome, the shallow breath when something feels uncertain, the impulse to rush decisions when clarity hasn't arrived yet. These signals are not problems, they are transmissions. The field is exquisitely sensitive to these transmissions because they are stable, they repeat, they shape patterns over time, words fluctuate, emotions spike and fade, state persists. And persistence is what reality builds around. When your state changes, reality follows, often more quietly than expected. This is where misunderstanding often appears. People expect understanding to make life easier immediately. Instead, it makes life clearer. And clarity doesn't always feel comfortable at first. You see how often your external efforts were compensating for internal instability. You recognize how much energy was being spent managing outcomes instead of settling your own system. That recognition can feel confronting, but it is also freeing, because once you see where the signal originates, you know where change is possible. Understanding the field doesn't require belief. It doesn't ask you to adopt a worldview. It asks you to observe yourself honestly, to notice what you embody when you are not trying to be anything, to feel the difference between acting from steadiness and acting from tension, to sense how your internal posture shapes what meets you. The 1% don't understand the field because they learned something rare. They understand it because they stopped ignoring what was already obvious. They stopped mistaking intention for signal. They stopped assuming that reality responds to effort instead of coherence. And once that assumption drops, the relationship changes. You're no longer trying to get reality to cooperate. You're paying attention to how you're participating. This is where understanding becomes lived, not dramatic, not mystical, quiet, practical, unavoidable. And once you see that the field responds to what you are, not what you say, there's no going back to pretending otherwise. When understanding begins to move from idea into experience, the first thing that changes is rarely visible from the outside. Life does not suddenly reorganize itself. Circumstances do not immediately improve. Problems do not resolve on command. What changes first is something far quieter and far more consequential. The internal noise begins to drop. Most people are accustomed to a constant stream of inner commentary, planning, anticipating, rehearsing, evaluating, a background hum of mental movement that never fully turns off. Even when things are going well, there is often a subtle monitoring happening underneath. Is this going to last? What should I do next? How do I make sure this doesn't slip away? This noise feels normal because it has been there for so long. Understanding begins when that noise softens, not all at once, but enough for you to notice the difference. At first, this reduction can feel unsettling. You may interpret it as a lack of motivation or a loss of momentum. You might wonder if you've become passive or detached. In reality, something else is happening. Your system is no longer working overtime to manage the future. It is settling into the present without needing constant justification. That settling changes the quality of your attention. And attention is one of the most influential elements of your signal. As the noise drops, urgency begins to lose its grip. You still care about outcomes, you still have desires, but the edge softens. You're no longer leaning forward energetically, trying to pull the future toward you. That shift is subtle, but the field responds to it immediately. Resistance decreases. Situations that once required force begin to move with less effort. This stage often confuses people because it doesn't feel like progress. There's no dramatic insight to point to. No moment you can easily explain. You may even feel suspicious of the ease that begins to appear in certain areas. When things start to flow without strain, the mind looks for a reason. It wants to understand why. And when it can't find one, it often assumes the ease is temporary or undeserved. And this is where many people unconsciously reintroduce tension. But the ease is not an accident, it's the byproduct of coherence. When your internal state becomes more stable, reality has something solid to organize around. You stop sending mixed signals. You're no longer wanting something while bracing for disappointment at the same time. That internal alignment simplifies your interaction with the field. You might notice this first in how decisions feel. Choices that once took hours of analysis begin to resolve more quickly. You don't argue with yourself as much. You don't rehearse multiple futures. You sense when something fits and when it doesn't without needing to justify it. That clarity is not intellectual, it's embodied. Conversations often shift during this phase as well. The tone changes. You speak with less defensiveness. You listen without preparing responses in advance. There's less effort to manage perception. People may respond differently to you without being able to explain why, because your presence is cleaner. The field translates that coherence into smoother interaction. Another subtle change appears in how you relate to time. You stop feeling like everything needs to happen immediately. Deadlines still matter, but they no longer dominate your internal landscape. You act when something opens rather than pushing to make it open. This doesn't slow your life down, it makes your timing more accurate. When urgency drops, your actions become more precise. Many people misinterpret this stage and think they've lost ambition. What's actually happening is that ambition is being stripped of anxiety. You're no longer trying to outrun discomfort. You're allowing movement to arise from clarity instead of pressure. That shift feels unfamiliar if your identity was built around effort. This is also where trust quietly begins to form, not as a belief, but as a lived experience. You notice that things continue to move even when you're not forcing them. Outcomes still develop, situations still resolve, and each time that happens without strain, something in your system relaxes further. Trust becomes less about hope and more about recognition. There's often a period of doubt here. You may think nothing significant is happening. Externally, life may look much the same, but internally, the structure has changed. The field is responding to that change, even if the effects are not yet dramatic. This is where patience becomes important, not as discipline, but as alignment. You're no longer waiting for proof. You're allowing the new state to stabilize. The first sign that this stabilization is real is that you stop scanning reality for confirmation. You're less interested in signs, less invested in immediate results. You're not checking constantly to see if something worked. That reduction in monitoring is itself a powerful signal. It tells the field that you're no longer dependent on reassurance. This phase doesn't eliminate challenges. Problems still arise, uncertainty still appears. But your relationship to these experiences changes. You respond instead of react. You adjust without collapsing. You don't take friction as a personal verdict. This is not emotional numbness, it's emotional regulation without suppression. Understanding at this level is not something you can perform. You can't pretend your way into it. It emerges naturally when your nervous system finds a new baseline, and once it does, reality begins to respond differently. Most people never reach this stage because they abandon it too quickly. They mistake quiet for stagnation. They equate ease with lack of progress. They return to effort because effort feels familiar. The small percentage who continue are not chasing results, they are allowing coherence to deepen. What changes first is not your life, it's how you inhabit it. And that change, once stable, alters everything that follows. This is where most people quietly lose the thread without realizing it. The shift is subtle and convincing. Insight arrives, the patterns make sense, the language resonates, and because it resonates, the mind assumes that something fundamental has already changed. Often it hasn't. The mind is extraordinarily capable of recognizing truth without allowing it to reorganize behavior. It can agree with an idea, admire it, repeat it, even teach it, while the deeper structures remain untouched. Understanding at the level of thought creates a sense of arrival. You feel closer to change, informed, oriented. That feeling can be mistaken for transformation, and this is where progress quietly stalls. When understanding turns into identity, coherence begins to fracture again. You start to relate to insight as something you possess rather than something you practice. Language improves. Self-awareness increases. But when pressure appears, the same reactions surface. Control sneaks back in. Urgency returns in refined forms. Avoidance gets better dressed. And because you can explain what's happening, it feels less threatening. But the field doesn't respond to explanation. It responds to repetition. This is one of the most uncomfortable realizations for people on this path. Knowing something does not mean you are embodying it. Familiarity is not integration. Recognition is not coherence. The field distinguishes these instantly. It responds to what is stable in you, not what you understand on good days. Many people get stuck here because this stage feels like progress. You can see patterns more clearly, you catch yourself faster, you understand why certain dynamics exist. That clarity is valuable, but it can become a refuge. You stay in the realm of interpretation instead of entering the realm of change. You analyze your reactions instead of altering them. You explain misalignment instead of releasing it. There is a quiet comfort in this position. You are no longer unconscious, but you're also not required to surrender anything yet. You can remain informed while staying intact, and the mind likes that. Real embodiment, however, demands cost. It requires letting go of behaviors that once kept you safe. It asks you to act differently before circumstances force you to. That step is far less appealing than understanding why things are the way they are. This is where many people turn insight into method. They package understanding into techniques, steps, or identities. They try to stabilize it by naming it. But naming does not stabilize state, only repetition does. And repetition happens in lived moments, not conceptual ones. You might notice this trap when nothing external shifts, but your internal narrative insists that it should have by now. You've learned so much, you see things clearly, and yet the same emotional loops appear, the same tensions, the same outcomes in different forms. This creates frustration, and the mind often resolves that frustration by seeking more information. More frameworks, more explanations, but accumulation does not refine the signal. It often adds noise. There is also a social layer to this stage. Insight becomes part of how you see yourself. You're someone who understands these things. You recognize patterns, you speak the language. That identity can become something you protect. And when identity is at stake, change feels threatening. Because change would require letting go of who you think you are, not just what you believe. The field is indifferent to self-image. It does not respond to how evolved you feel or how articulate you are about your inner life. It responds to how you behave when things don't go your way, how quickly you recover from disappointment, how you handle ambiguity, how you speak when you feel misunderstood, these moments reveal far more than insight ever could. One of the clearest signs that understanding has turned into an obstacle is how quickly you reach for interpretation when something feels off. Instead of staying with the sensation of discomfort, you label it. Instead of adjusting your behavior, you adjust your story. The story can be accurate, it can even be compassionate, but it does not alter the signal. The field does not engage with narratives, it engages with states. This is also where intellectual certainty quietly freezes curiosity. When you believe you already understand, you stop listening. You stop noticing subtle misalignments. You stop being surprised by your own reactions. Certainty feels stable, but it often masks stagnation. Real coherence remains responsive. It stays open to correction. The few who move beyond this stage do something deceptively simple. They stop using understanding to feel secure. They allow it to make them honest instead. They notice where their behavior does not match their insight and resist the urge to explain it away. They don't dramatize the gap. They don't judge it. They work with it directly. This work is unglamorous. It happens in ordinary moments, a pause before reacting, a different choice when no one is watching, a boundary held without justification. These moments don't feel like breakthroughs, but they interrupt patterns. And interruption is how coherence builds. Another important shift occurs here. You stop measuring progress by how aligned you feel and start measuring it by how you behave under pressure. Feeling aligned is easy when life is smooth. Embodying alignment when things are inconvenient is where the signal stabilizes. The field responds to that stability far more than to insight expressed in calm conditions. There is a humbling realization that accompanies this stage. You begin to see how often you used understanding as a shield against vulnerability, how knowledge provided a sense of control, how explanation softened discomfort without requiring change. Seeing this clearly can feel exposing, but it also opens a door that was previously closed. Once understanding stops being something you hold and starts becoming something that holds you, the dynamic shifts. You are no longer trying to prove that you get it. You're allowing life to reveal where you don't. And that willingness keeps the signal clean. This is why only a small percentage move through this phase. It requires relinquishing the safety of being right. It asks you to let understanding destabilize you again, deeper this time. But on the other side of that destabilization, coherence begins to take root in places insight never reached. And when that happens, the field responds in ways that feel unmistakable. This is the point where many people quietly conclude that something has stopped working. They've understood enough to change how they see things, but not enough yet to see why life suddenly feels more precise, sometimes even more uncomfortable. Old reactions surface faster. Familiar triggers seem louder. Situations arise that press directly on the same internal places again and again. From the outside, it can look like regression. From the inside, it can feel like effort without reward. But this phase is not failure, it is calibration. When your signal becomes clearer, the field does not add more experiences at random. It begins to highlight interference. Anything that no longer matches your state becomes visible because it can no longer hide inside noise. Before, misalignment blended in. You tolerated it, you adapted, you explained it away. Now it stands out. It costs energy. It creates friction you can no longer ignore. This is why certain relationships suddenly feel heavier. Why obligations that once felt manageable now feel draining. Why habits you barely noticed before now register as constricting. Nothing new has been imposed. The difference is that your system is no longer fragmented enough to absorb the mismatch. The field is not punishing you. It is showing you exactly where coherence breaks down. Most people misinterpret this phase because they expect understanding to smooth life out immediately. Instead, it sharpens contrast. What fits begins to feel supportive. What doesn't begins to feel loud. This contrast is not meant to be resolved through force or explanation. It is meant to be listened to. The discomfort is informational. One of the most common ways people derail themselves here is by reintroducing urgency. Once you understand how the field responds, it's tempting to expect faster movement, clearer results, proof that your internal shift is real. That expectation tightens your signal. It creates a subtle monitoring of reality, a quiet scanning for confirmation. And scanning is a form of control. Urgency doesn't feel like doubt. At this stage, it feels like commitment, like focus, like wanting to do it right. But underneath, urgency carries a specific message. What is happening now is not enough yet. The field responds to that message with delay, not as resistance, but as accuracy. Instability cannot be built upon. You may notice this in your body before you recognize it conceptually. A forward-leaning energy, shallow breath, the sense that something needs to arrive before you can relax. That internal posture compresses your signal. It narrows perception. It pulls attention out of the present moment and anchors it to an imagined future where relief exists. The field responds to presence, not projection. Another pattern that surfaces during calibration is conditional coherence. You feel grounded when things are moving. You feel centered when outcomes are favorable. But when something stalls or deviates, coherence collapses. Old reflexes return, control, justification, withdrawal. These reactions are not evidence of failure. They are revealing where your alignment depends on external conditions. The field does not respond to conditional states. It responds to stability. Stability does not mean emotional neutrality. It means that your internal orientation does not fracture when circumstances do. You can feel frustration without becoming reactive. You can feel uncertainty without abandoning your baseline. That capacity is what this phase develops. Calibration often arrives through small disruptions rather than dramatic challenges. A delay that tests your patience. A conversation that triggers an old pattern. A plan that falls through without explanation. These moments are not obstacles, they are mirrors. They show you where coherence is embodied and where it is still conceptual. This is also where people begin to think they are being tested, as if the field is evaluating them. That framing creates unnecessary pressure. The field is not testing belief or worthiness. It is responding to structure. Just as a bridge reveals its integrity under load, your internal structure becomes visible under stress. The stress is not personal, it is functional. If you remain attentive during this phase, something important happens. You begin to recognize interference as soon as it arises. You catch the moment urgency enters. You feel the shift from presence to projection. And instead of fighting it or explaining it away, you pause. That pause restores coherence more effectively than any technique. Many people try to bypass this phase by reframing discomfort quickly. They look for meaning to neutralize the sensation. But premature meaning-making often delays release. The field is not asking you to feel better about misalignment, it is asking you to stop carrying it. As calibration continues, patterns intensify briefly, not because they are strengthening, but because they are becoming visible. You see clearly what no longer fits your signal. This clarity can feel like loss. Releasing misaligned structures often involves grief because they were familiar. Familiarity creates a sense of safety even when it drains you. Letting go during this phase is rarely dramatic. It does not usually involve bold declarations or immediate external change. It begins internally. You stop investing energy, you stop negotiating with yourself, you stop defending what exhausts you. That internal release alters the signal before anything shifts externally. As the signal adjusts, reality responds. Conversations happen that would have felt impossible before. Situations dissolve without conflict. Doors close without resistance, not because you forced them shut, but because you stopped holding them open. The field organizes around your withdrawal of attention. The people who move through calibration do not rush it. They do not demand proof. They do not treat discomfort as a problem to solve. They listen to it as information. They allow coherence to stabilize under pressure. And once it does, the next shift begins to surface. This is characterized by a clarity about what no longer belongs in their signal at all. This is the phase that determines whether understanding matures or fractures. Most people turn back here, mistaking calibration for collapse. The small percentage who continue are not braver. They are simply willing to let reality refine them instead of rushing to reclaim control. Once your relationship has changed at the root, something settles. This is what most people expect to feel earlier and don't. It doesn't arrive with excitement or relief. It arrives with clarity. Quiet, grounded clarity. You stop trying to manage reality from the outside. It no longer feels necessary. Control begins to feel heavy rather than responsible. You notice how much energy it used to require, how much internal tension it carried, how much of your attention it consumed. Letting go of that effort doesn't make you passive. It makes you responsive. You act from what is actually present rather than from what you're trying to prevent. One of the first things that changes is how you move through decisions. You make fewer of them, but they land more cleanly. There's less internal debate, less rehearsal, less need to justify your choices to yourself. You sense when something is aligned and when it isn't, even if you can't fully explain why yet, and you trust that sense without needing to prove it in advance. That trust doesn't feel bold, it feels obvious. Your nervous system recovers faster now. When something unexpected happens, you still feel it, you still react, but the reaction doesn't reorganize you the way it used to. You return to center more quickly. You don't spiral for as long. You don't build entire narratives out of temporary disruptions. This isn't emotional suppression, it's resilience without effort. You also notice a shift in timing. Things happen with less friction. You're no longer pushing against moments that aren't ready. You move when something opens, and you wait when it doesn't, without turning waiting into tension. That alone changes how life meets you. Timing becomes collaborative instead of adversarial. There's a subtle confidence that emerges here, and it's very different from certainty. You don't feel like you know what's going to happen. You feel like you can meet whatever does. That confidence isn't loud. It doesn't need reinforcement. It comes from coherence that has been tested and held. Another change appears in how you sense the world around you. You start noticing shifts earlier. You start sensing that something is already forming, even if it hasn't arrived yet. You feel when a conversation is about to change. You sense when a situation is resolving before it resolves. You notice when something is complete long before the external closure appears. This doesn't make you special. It makes you attuned. When internal noise drops, perception sharpens naturally. You're no longer reacting only to outcomes, you're responding to trajectories. And because of that, you rarely feel blindsided. Even when something is difficult, there's a strange familiarity to it. A sense of, yes, this fits, even if you don't like it. This is where many people misunderstand what's happening. They think they're influencing reality more directly now. They think things are manifesting faster. But influence is not what's increased. Alignment is. You're not ahead of reality, you're in sync with it. And that sync removes collision. At this stage, coincidences lose their drama. They stop feeling like signs and start feeling like structure, useful, timely, almost understated. They don't need to impress you. They simply confirm that your signal is clean enough for things to line up without force. Then comes the realization that changes everything. The field didn't start responding once you understood it. It was always responding. The difference is that it was responding to the unconscious version of you before, the version that operated automatically, the version shaped by habit, fear, expectation, and adaptation. That version was loud, it was consistent, and it was always in conversation with reality. Understanding didn't activate the field, it activated awareness at the level where the signal originates. The conscious and unconscious stopped pulling in different directions. Thought, body, emotion, and behavior began pointing the same way, not perfectly, but honestly. That honesty is what changed the response. You stop asking why things happened the way they did in the past. You see it. You recognize how faithfully life mirrored what was active in you at the time. That recognition doesn't create shame. It creates compassion for yourself and for others. You understand how much of human life is driven by patterns people never chose consciously, and you stop trying to correct or convince. You know that explanation never changed you either. What replaces that effort is something simpler. Attention. You listen inwardly. You notice contraction before it shapes action. You feel alignment before you name it. You respond to yourself more deliberately. And reality follows that lead the way it always has. Nothing mystical happened to the field. Nothing unlocked, nothing turned on. What changed was your position within it. You stopped standing outside trying to make it work, and you began moving from inside it. Co-creation stopped being an idea and became a lived experience. This is why only a small percentage truly understand the field. The field asks for something most people avoid: consistency, honesty, the willingness to let identity loosen, the willingness to stop performing understanding and start embodying it when no one is watching. If you've stayed with me all the way to the end, you already know whether this resonated. You felt it land somewhere deeper than thought. If that's true for you, write this simple sentence in the comments so I know you were really here with me. I'm aligned with the field. Understanding the field doesn't change reality, but it does change how reality meets you.